My name is Samuel, and I'm 79 years old. I live alone now, in a quiet town in Indiana where the mornings are slow, and the neighbors wave from a distance they rarely cross. But once, a long time ago, I wasn't alone. I was a husband. I was a father. And for a time, I was everything to a little girl who used to call me her hero. Her name is Emily. She came into our lives when I was already 34. My wife, Mary, and I had tried for years. We prayed, cried, and made peace with the silence of a childless home. And then, without warning, we were blessed with a miracle. Emily was born on a windy morning in September, and I swear the moment I held her, I felt time stop. Her little fingers curled around mine like she had always been waiting for me. Mary didn't stay long after that. Ovarian cancer came cruel and quick. By the time Emily was 4, I was both father and mother. I remember waking up to make her lunches, brushing her tiny curls into uneven ponytails, and tucking her in with lullabies I barely knew the words to. I was no poet, but she didn't care. I was her everything. And she was mine. I worked as a carpenter back then. Good, honest work. Built shelves, fixed doors, mended floors. I'd take Emily with me sometimes. She'd sit on overturned paint buckets, legs swinging, babbling about school while I hammered away. The clients would smile and give her cookies. She was my little sidekick, always asking questions, always watching me work with wonder in her eyes. "Daddy, you build everything. Even our home?" "Yes, sweetheart. Even our home." I didn't have much, but I gave her everything I could. When she turned 10, I bought her a bicycle from a garage sale and repainted it her favorite color, lavender. When she turned 13, I saved for 6 months to get her a second-hand laptop for school. I skipped meals sometimes to make sure she had lunch money. I wore the same winter coat for 15 years because Emily always needed new books, new shoes, braces, a prom dress. When it came time for college, she got into Purdue. I cried the day the acceptance letter came, not because I didn't want her to go, but because I wasn't sure how I'd afford it. But I found a way. I always did. Took on weekend jobs. Cleaned gutters. Did night shifts sanding floors. It didn't matter how tired I was. I just wanted her to rise above what I had known. I still remember helping her move into the dorms. She hugged me so tight that day. She whispered, "You're the best dad in the world." And I believed her. I still want to believe her. We wrote letters at first, then emails. She told me about her classes, her new friends, the city lights she was falling in love with. I was happy for her, even as my house grew quieter. I'd walk past her empty room and smile at the posters still pinned on the walls. The purple bicycle stayed in the garage, its tires slowly deflating like forgotten memories. Years went by. She graduated with honors, and I stood in the back of the crowd in my only suit, clapping with pride. She found work in Chicago, something with marketing and numbers and meetings I didn't understand. I just knew she was happy, and that was enough. But slowly, something began to shift. Her emails got shorter. The phone calls turned into voicemails. She started saying things like, "Sorry, Dad, I've just been swamped," or "Maybe next month we can catch up." I told myself it was just life. Everyone gets busy. But deep down, I felt it, that slow, aching distance creeping in. The girl who used to crawl into my bed after a nightmare now couldn't find time for a 5-minute call. And yet, I kept defending her. To myself. To others. I told anyone who asked, "Emily's doing great. She's just busy working hard. Big city life, you know." But inside, the silence was getting louder. I started keeping a journal. Just small entries, really. Bits of thoughts I couldn't say out loud. I'd write things like, she used to laugh at my jokes, or, I wonder if she remembers the lavender bike. I didn't want to blame her. I just missed her. People say time heals, but it also hides. Hides the little cracks forming between people. Cracks that eventually become chasms. I raised her with my hands, with calluses and cracked knuckles. I gave her everything, not for praise, but because I loved her. Because I believed in her. I just never imagined that the girl who once said I was her world, would one day see me as less than worthy of hers. Emily moved to Chicago the summer after her graduation. I helped her pack everything into a small U-Haul, mostly clothes, a few dishes, and boxes of books she couldn't part with. Her new apartment was on the 3rd floor, no elevator, just creaky wooden stairs and peeling paint. But she was glowing with excitement. "Dad, this is just the beginning," she said, hands on her hips, surveying the tiny space like it was a castle. I smiled, even though my back ached from hauling boxes. "Every castle starts somewhere, sweetheart." We set up her bed, unpacked her pots and pans, and put up some curtains I'd hemmed at home. That night, before I drove back to Indiana, we had dinner at a little diner around the corner. She held my hand across the table, and for a moment, I thought nothing would ever change. But life has its way of unfolding in layers. At first, she'd call every week. Tell me about her job, an assistant position at a big marketing firm downtown. She'd laugh about her clumsy boss and long subway rides. Then she started dating a man named Brian. An accountant. Polite voice, firm handshake, expensive shoes. She said he made her feel seen. I only met him twice. Once at a Thanksgiving dinner I hosted, where he barely looked up from his phone. And once more when they visited on their way to a wedding. He complimented my wood shop in the garage, called it quaint. That word lingered with me. Like my whole life was a rustic souvenir. Emily seemed smitten, though. And I didn't want to be the overprotective father who cast judgment too quickly. If she was happy, I would make room for that. Even if it meant standing quietly on the sidelines. They got married a year later. It was a large ceremony in the suburbs of Chicago, white roses, string quartets, champagne towers. I wore the same suit from her graduation and kept adjusting the sleeves. Everyone else looked like they belonged on magazine covers. I walked her down the aisle, heart bursting and breaking at once. She was beautiful. Radiant. And yet, when I kissed her cheek and gave her away, I felt something leave me. Something final. Like I was no longer needed. At the reception, I sat at a table near the back. Brian's parents were well-dressed and well-spoken, the kind who sip wine like it's currency. His mother smiled politely at me and asked, "So, you worked with your hands your whole life?" "Yes, ma'am," I replied. "Built homes. Furniture. Even a few boats." She nodded like I just said I collect bottle caps. Emily never meant to draw that line, but it was there. Between her new world and mine. She called less often after that. Her voice grew efficient. Like she was always on her way to a meeting or stepping into a cab. I started mailing her little things, hand-carved picture frames, a jewelry box I made from cherry wood. She sent thank-you texts, sometimes days later. Short ones. "THX Dad. Looks great." One summer, I visited her. She had moved into a townhouse. Bigger. Sleek floors, granite countertops. It didn't feel like her, not the girl who once collected pressed flowers and wrote poems on napkins. But people change. Brian greeted me with a nod. Emily gave me a tour, quickly, like checking off boxes. "This is the guest room," she said. "But we're converting it into an office. You'll probably be more comfortable at a motel nearby." I nodded, even though the room was empty. We had dinner that night. Her in-laws were there too. Conversation revolved around stock portfolios, real estate investments, golf memberships. I smiled and listened. I didn't speak much, there was nothing in my world they seemed curious about. At one point, Brian's father asked me if I'd ever invested in the market. I said no, just savings bonds and a little land back home. He chuckled and said, the old school way. Doesn't really grow wealth, does it? I looked at my daughter. She didn't say a word. I drove back home in silence that weekend. Something inside me ached, but it wasn't loneliness. It was something heavier. Something like erasure. Like I was slowly being written out of the story. I didn't hear from her for almost 3 months after that. I kept busy. Mended fences. Volunteered at the church pantry. Helped fix a neighbor's roof after a storm. My hands still worked. My body still bent to purpose. But my heart, it was getting quieter. And still, I loved her. That never stopped. But I could feel the drift. Like she was sailing away from me on a ship I built, waving from the deck, not realizing I was still standing on shore. The house I lived in for most of my adult life sat on a patch of land just outside town, not large, but peaceful. I built it myself, every nail and board. Mary had planted roses out front before she passed, and Emily used to chase fireflies in the backyard during the summer. Every corner had a memory, a heartbeat. But houses grow quiet when the laughter fades. By the time I turned 74, I could feel the emptiness pressing in. The roof needed repairs I couldn't afford, and the furnace made a sound like it was arguing with itself. One night, I tripped over the hallway rug and hit my elbow hard enough to bruise bone. The silence afterward scared me more than the fall. That's when Emily started pushing the idea of downsizing. "Dad," she said over the phone, "you don't need all that space anymore. You're just one person. Why not rent something smaller? Something manageable?" Her voice was light, casual, like she was suggesting a new brand of cereal. I agreed, mostly because I didn't want to argue. She didn't offer to help me move or come see the house one last time. She said she'd be traveling for work that month. I packed everything alone. I sold the house to a young couple, newlyweds expecting their first child. They asked about the creaky steps and the swing in the backyard. I told them stories while they signed papers. They smiled, probably thinking I was just a sentimental old man. Maybe I was. I moved into a small rental unit in town, a one-bedroom place above a hardware store. It smelled faintly of paint and sawdust, which I didn't mind. The kitchen was narrow, the living room barely wide enough for my recliner and bookshelf. I brought only what I needed. The rest, furniture, photo albums, keepsakes, I boxed up and put in storage. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Emily didn't visit. She sent a text, "Glad you're settled. Simpler is better at your age," slightly smiling face. At your age. It stung more than it should have. I started living small. Cooked in a single pan. Used one plate. Read the same books over and over again. I kept a schedule, morning walks, grocery trips on Wednesdays, church on Sundays. There's something about routine that keeps you from drowning in the hours. Birthdays and holidays came and went. Emily stopped sending cards. She was always busy, launching a new campaign, meeting with clients, traveling with Brian. She posted photos online sometimes. Paris. Dubai. Beaches with white sand and smiles that didn't look like mine. One evening, I realized I didn't remember the last time I heard her laugh. It was a small thing. A strange thought. But it stayed with me. I started journaling more. Writing letters I never sent. Not angry ones, just quiet conversations I wished we'd had. Things like, "Emily, remember when we made pancakes at midnight? Do you still wear lavender? You used to love it." I'm still proud of you. Even now. I kept her childhood drawings in a drawer beside my bed. One of them had us holding hands under a tree with the words, "Me and Daddy Forever," written in crayon. I looked at it sometimes when the nights felt heavier than the blankets. Then came her birthday. I had always sent her something. Even when she forgot mine. Even when she didn't answer. This time, I didn't. Not out of spite, just tiredness. I didn't want to send love into a void anymore. She didn't notice. Weeks passed. No call. No message. That's when I realized something painful. I hadn't just moved to a smaller room, I'd been moved to a smaller place in her life. A quieter corner. Something folded and forgotten. And still, I didn't stop loving her. Love, I've learned, isn't loud. It's not made of grand gestures. It's in remembering someone's favorite tea. It's in building their desk so they can do homework. It's in driving 6 hours just to see them smile for 5 minutes. I don't know when I stopped being important to her. I don't think she did it on purpose. That's the thing, neglect wears a softer face than cruelty. But I felt it. And the room kept getting smaller. It had been 4 years since I last spent Thanksgiving with Emily. Most years, I spent it alone. A simple meal. Sometimes a neighbor would drop off a plate, or the church would offer warm company and a hymnal. I never minded the quiet, until it started to echo. Then one November, Emily called. She said, "Dad, you should come up this year. We're having a big dinner. The kids would love to see you." I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to go, but because I wasn't sure if I belonged anymore. But she sounded cheerful, almost like the girl I remembered. I said yes. I took the early morning bus from Indiana to Chicago. Carried a small overnight bag, dressed in my Sunday coat. The city had changed. Tall buildings, honking cars, and people rushing past like they were late for life. I clutched the address in my coat pocket and reminded myself to breathe. Emily's house was even larger than I remembered. White pillars, 2 garages, a lawn that looked hand-painted. Her youngest boy opened the door. "Grandpa?" he asked, puzzled, like I was a guest speaker. Emily came down the stairs in heels and a silk blouse. She hugged me, a quick pat on the back, and led me inside. The house smelled of cinnamon and polish. The furniture was sharp-edged and expensive. Every surface gleamed like it had never been touched. Brian greeted me with a nod and a distracted smile. He was already sipping wine with his parents, who were seated like royalty at the kitchen island. The kids were on tablets, feet tucked under them like little strangers. I sat down at the dining table, tried to take it all in. Silverware I didn't recognize, plates too heavy for comfort. It was a feast, no doubt, turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, dishes with names I couldn't pronounce. But the warmth was missing. During dinner, someone asked me what I'd been up to. I said I'd helped repair a neighbor's porch, volunteered at the food pantry. Brian's father chuckled. "Still fixing things, huh? That's noble." Noble. The word felt like a compliment dipped in pity. Emily laughed, politely, not warmly. Then, turning to her kids, she said, "Grandpa's not used to this kind of life. He's simple." Simple. I looked down at my plate, suddenly not hungry. Later, while we were cleaning up, I offered to help. Emily waved me off. "Dad, just relax. We have a service come in after big meals." I nodded and sat back down. That night, I stayed in the guest room. It was cold. Not physically, but in feeling. There were no photos on the nightstand, no signs of family. Just blank walls and folded towels. I lay awake, listening to the faint hum of laughter downstairs. I wasn't part of it. The next morning, I came down to the kitchen early. Emily was making coffee. She looked tired, or maybe just uncomfortable. "Did you sleep okay?" she asked. "Fine," I lied. She leaned against the counter, sipped from a mug that said "Girl Boss." Then she said it, casually, like small talk. "Dad, you've got to think about your future. You're getting older. That apartment above the hardware store, it's not really safe. Have you thought about moving into one of those retirement homes? You know, something affordable?" Something affordable. I felt my chest tighten. She wasn't being cruel, just thoughtless. She wasn't offering help, just making a problem go away. I swallowed hard. "I'm fine where I am." She shrugged. "I'm just saying, you're not getting any richer, and it's not fair to expect us to take care of you later." The words landed like stones. She didn't know. She had no idea. She assumed because I lived simply, I had nothing. Because I wore old coats and used flip phones and sent handwritten letters, I was poor. I looked at her, my daughter, my only child, and realized I wasn't her hero anymore. I was an obligation. A burden. A footnote in her well-curated life. I left that afternoon. Said I had church responsibilities, even though it was Friday. She didn't argue. Just kissed my cheek and said, "Take care, Dad." I walked to the bus stop in the cold. Clutched my coat tight and tried not to feel it. But I did. That kind of silence, after being called poor by your own blood, sticks to your bones. It doesn't scream. It just sits there. Quiet. Heavy. Permanent. Have your children ever made you feel small in your own family? Share your story below. When I got back to my apartment that night, I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat in the dark, listening to the faint hum of the heater. Outside, the streetlight flickered like it couldn't decide whether to stay alive. Her words kept ringing in my ears. "You're not getting any richer. Something affordable." I wasn't angry. That's not the kind of man I am. But I was hollow. Like a drawer emptied too many times. I had built my life with my hands, filled it with patience and sacrifice, and now I was being measured by square footage and income brackets. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The steam fogged the glass, but it couldn't blur what I was feeling. I reached for my journal, the same one I started after Mary passed, and flipped to a blank page. Tonight, I wrote, my daughter called me poor. Not with cruelty, but with certainty. And that hurts more. I closed the book and sat in silence for a long while. Then I remembered the box. It was tucked away in the back of my closet, behind old coats and the lavender bike bell Emily once rang 1,000 times. A wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, carved with delicate scrolls and a tiny brass latch. I'd made it decades ago, before Emily was born. Mary used to keep her letters inside. I pulled it out and sat with it on my lap. Inside were bundles wrapped in rubber bands. Faded envelopes, savings bonds, neatly folded documents. I laid them out on the table like puzzle pieces. $20 bills, each one crisp. Tucked behind them, bank records dating back to the 80s. Land deeds, 3 of them, for small plots just outside town. One I'd bought for $4,000 in 1993. Another, inherited from my uncle. And the third, a quiet purchase I'd made after Emily graduated, just in case she ever needed it. There were index cards too, with handwritten notes. June 1987, $100 from Mrs. Langston's bookshelf repair. October 1992, $250 saved from flooring job. No coffee for a month. Worth it. 2001, sold old truck, invested half in bond. Keep quiet about this. Every dollar I'd saved, every decision I'd made, was there. And suddenly, I saw my life, not as one of poverty, but of planning. Of purpose. I didn't wear wealth on my sleeve. I didn't believe in showing off what you had. But I wasn't poor. Not by any measure that mattered. I had over $230,000 in savings between those bonds, cash, and modest investments. Enough to live comfortably. Enough to leave something behind. But Emily never asked. She never once asked how I managed. Never asked how I afforded her college tuition, her braces, her trips. She assumed I scraped by, that I lived day to day. That because I didn't talk about money, I didn't have any. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the erasure. The fact that my quiet sacrifices were invisible to her. I sat at the table for hours, running my fingers over the papers. Not out of pride, but to remind myself, I wasn't what she said I was. I wasn't poor. I was prepared. All these years, I saved not just for emergencies, but for dignity. For the right to stand tall when no one else saw me. I put everything back into the box, carefully. Then I took out a fresh page in my journal and began to write something different. Not a letter of sorrow. A plan. Not out of revenge. But because love doesn't mean silence. Not anymore. I would not let her pity define me. She thought I was poor. She thought I was fading. But one day, she'd learn that the man who built her world also knew how to quietly protect his own. I met Benjamin Harper on a windy Monday morning, the kind of morning where the cold gets into your bones before the coffee does. His office was on the second floor of an old brick building in town, nothing fancy, just a plaque on the door and the smell of old paper lingering in the halls. Ben's father had been my friend once, long ago. We built his porch together the summer after Mary died. He was a good man. Laughed loud, paid fair, never looked down on my work. I remember Emily used to play in their backyard while we hammered away. Now his son sat across from me in a buttoned vest and glasses, all grown up but with the same kindness in his eyes. "Mr. Carter," he said, "how can I help?" I placed the wooden box on his desk. It was heavier than it looked, not because of the contents, but because of what they meant. "I want to write a will," I told him. "I've been quiet long enough." He opened the box, leafed through the papers carefully. His eyebrows rose slightly as he flipped through the savings bonds, land deeds, investment statements. "Mr. Carter," he said, glancing up, "this is substantial. You've done well." I smiled faintly. "I was never poor, son. I just never felt the need to prove I wasn't." He nodded slowly, understanding settling into his expression. "I want to divide it up," I continued. "A portion to the local library, Mary loved to read. Another to the church pantry. And the largest chunk to a children's charity. Something small, something local. The kind that gives kids new shoes and warm meals." "And your daughter?" he asked gently. I looked out the window. The trees were bare, their branches etched against the sky like aching fingers. "She'll get something," I said. Not out of spite. But I need her to understand. She called me poor. Not with her words alone, but with how she looked at me. Like I was a weight to be carried instead of a man who carried her. Ben nodded, scribbling notes. "I'm not angry," I added. "I've made peace with who she's become. I just want her to know that the life she judged came from discipline, not lack. From love, not laziness." He asked a few more questions, formalities mostly. I signed the necessary documents, sealed the envelope with my name on it, and handed it back. As I stood to leave, Ben reached across the desk and shook my hand. "My father always said you were the most decent man he knew," he said quietly. "He used to say, Sam Carter may wear old boots, but his soul is solid gold." That caught me off guard. I hadn't heard my name spoken like that in years. I smiled, a little choked up. He was a good man. "Tell your mother I said hello." I walked out of the office lighter than I had in a long time. Not because I'd signed my name on paper, but because I had finally taken ownership of my own story. For so long, I'd let the silence speak for me. Let the world believe what it wanted, that I was just an old man clinging to a lifelong past. But the truth was clearer now. I hadn't saved all those years for money. I'd saved for clarity. For the moment when I could finally say, this is who I am. Not bitter. Not broken. Just a man who loved deeply, and planned quietly. And maybe, one day, Emily would open that will, not with greed in her heart, but with understanding in her eyes. But I didn't hold my breath. Because I had learned something even more valuable than what I kept in that little wooden box. Self-worth doesn't need to be proven. It just needs to be protected. I turned 80 on a quiet Tuesday in March. No balloons, no cake, no laughter echoing down a hallway. Just the soft creak of my chair, a cup of warm tea, and the sound of wind brushing against the window. The day before, I got a package in the mail, one of those pre-packed gift boxes with flavored coffee, chocolate-covered almonds, and a card that read, "Happy 80th, Dad. Hope you're staying warm. Emily and Brian." No call. No voice. Just a name on a piece of cardboard. I held the card in my hands for a long time. Read it over and over like it might reveal something more the next time around. It didn't. I set the box aside. I didn't touch the coffee. The almonds tasted like dust. I'd told no one it was my birthday. Not the grocer, not the postman, not the folks at church. I didn't want pity. I just wanted to feel something close to remembered. To know that I still existed in someone's world outside my own four walls. The hours stretched out like tired limbs. I made myself a simple dinner, fried eggs and toast, and sat at the small table, the same one I'd eaten at every night for years. But then, something happened. Just before sunset, there was a knock at my door. 3 quick taps, followed by muffled giggles. I opened it and found 5 children from the neighborhood library group, the ones I'd read stories to every other Saturday. They stood there with handmade cards, balloons from the dollar store, and a cupcake with a single candle in it. "Happy birthday, Mr. Carter," they shouted, their faces beaming. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, stunned, with my hand over my heart. "Miss Clara from the library said it was your big 80, one of them said proudly. "She said you didn't want a fuss, but we made one anyway." They came inside, placed cards on my table, and sang the birthday song, off-key and too fast, but it was the sweetest sound I'd heard in years. We sat together for an hour. I made hot chocolate, and they told me about their school projects, their favorite books, the silly things their siblings did. The apartment felt full again, alive, like it hadn't in a very long time. When they left, I stood at the door and watched them skip down the hallway. One of the little girls turned back and shouted, "You're our favorite old person." I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. The next morning, I went to the library and quietly handed a sealed envelope to Miss Clara. Inside was a check for $25,000 with a note, for the children. For their futures. From a man who remembers what it's like to be small. She cried when she opened it. I just smiled and walked out. 2 days later, the local paper printed a small article on page 6, "Anonymous donation brings joy to local library and youth readers." They didn't use my name, but the photo showed Miss Clara holding up the check, surrounded by kids with smiles that stretched a mile. That weekend, Brian saw the article. And suddenly, I got a call. It was Emily. Her voice was rushed, like she had run up a flight of stairs before dialing. "Dad. I saw the paper." "Was that you?" I paused, then said, "Yes, sweetheart. It was me." There was a long silence on the other end. "I didn't know you had that kind of money," she said. "No," I replied gently, you never asked. She didn't know what to say. Her voice cracked a little as she asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" And for a moment, I almost said what I had been holding in for years. But I didn't want bitterness. Not on the heels of joy. So I simply said, "Sometimes the things we don't say speak the loudest." We ended the call shortly after. She didn't apologize. Not yet. But her voice was different, softer. Like a window had cracked open after years of being painted shut. That night, I sat by my window, holding one of the handmade birthday cards from the children. It said, "You make us feel safe and smart. Thank you for being our friend." And in that moment, I realized something Emily had forgotten. You don't need balloons or banners to be celebrated. Sometimes, the quiet love of strangers can remind you that your life still matters. If you were in my place, would you forgive them? Or let silence be the answer? It only took one article to change the way my daughter saw me. A small column in a local paper, 5 paragraphs, no picture of me, just a blurred photo of Miss Clara holding that donation check, surrounded by those smiling kids. But that was enough. Enough to start the unraveling. Emily called again the next evening. This time, she wasn't just curious. She was shaken. "Dad," she said quickly, "how much money do you actually have?" I could hear the tension in her voice. Not worry, no, it wasn't concern for my well-being. It was shock. Maybe even fear. As if she had been living under a truth she didn't know was fragile until it cracked beneath her feet. "I've saved, Emily," I replied calmly. "For a long time." Quietly. "But, why didn't you ever say anything? Why did you let me think," she stopped herself, "that I was poor?" I offered gently. Silence. "Dad, I didn't mean it like that," she muttered. "It's just, you live so simply. You always wore the same coat. You rent that tiny place. You don't live like you do," I said, finishing her sentence for her. She exhaled slowly. I could hear her trying to gather the right words, the careful ones. "I guess. I just didn't think you had anything set aside. I mean, if you'd told me, maybe we could have." "Done what?" I asked. "Treated me differently?" She didn't answer. I wasn't angry. I didn't raise my voice. I just let the silence teach her the lesson I could never force. "Emily," I said, "I didn't save to impress anyone. I didn't live simply because I had to. I lived that way because I chose to. I never needed more. And I never thought love should be earned by wealth." Her voice softened. "I just wish I'd known." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "But you didn't ask," I said. "You assumed. You built an idea of who I was and never thought to question it." Not once. There was a pause. "Brian's upset," she said suddenly. "He thinks it's unfair that you're giving so much to the library and charities. He says family should come first." I closed my eyes. There it was. The truth not even a newspaper could hide. I didn't respond right away. I wanted her to feel the weight of her own words. Then I said, "Family does come first. That's why I worked through winters to send you to school. That's why I sold my truck so you could have a computer. That's why I skipped doctor visits to make sure you had prom shoes and graduation pictures." Her breath caught. "I'm not punishing you, Emily," I added. "I just stopped waiting to be seen. I stopped waiting for someone to ask me who I am, instead of deciding it for me." "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said quietly. "I know," I whispered. "But you did." She asked if she could visit that weekend. I told her she could. I told her I'd be home, like always. Same recliner. Same window seat. Same old man waiting for someone who used to call him her hero. When she came, she brought a bouquet of roses, Mary's favorite. She hugged me longer this time. Not tightly, but longer. Her voice wavered a bit when she said, "Hi, Dad." We sat for a while. Talked about nothing. The weather. The neighbor's new puppy. She asked if I remembered the old treehouse in our backyard when she was little. I told her I'd built it on a Sunday afternoon when she was sick with the flu, just to cheer her up. She smiled faintly. I forgot about that. I never did, I said. She stayed for an hour. Maybe 2. But something between us was different. Not broken, but bruised. Healing, perhaps, but not whole. She asked about the will. I told her the truth. That she was in it. But that I had chosen to give a larger portion elsewhere. I want my money to go where it's most needed, I said. And to those who saw me before the newspaper did. She nodded. She didn't argue. She just said, I understand. And for the first time in years, I believed her. These days, I sit more than I stand. My knees don't hold like they used to, and my hands, once strong enough to lift beams and balance walls, now tremble when I button my shirt. But there's one place where I still feel steady, the chair by the window. It's an old recliner, worn at the arms and faded at the seams. I bought it when Emily was still a teenager. She used to curl up beside me with a blanket and a book. Sometimes we'd watch the rain together, saying nothing at all. Just breathing the same air, hearts resting in the same quiet space. Now, I sit there alone, looking out over the narrow street below. I see kids ride past on their bikes, hear neighbors laugh through thin walls, and smell the changing seasons in the cracks of the old windowpane. Emily visits now. Not often. But she comes. She doesn't stay long. Sometimes she brings one of the kids. They sit awkwardly on the couch, glance at their phones, ask a question or two. I don't blame them, they don't know me. How could they? I was never invited to their birthdays. Never asked to babysit. Never there for the scraped knees or bedtime stories. Still, I try. I keep candy in a bowl by the door. I tell them small stories about when their mother was their age, how she used to try to make pancakes and always burned them, or how she once tried to mail a letter to Santa using leaves and tape. Sometimes they smile. Other times, they just nod politely. And Emily, she's trying, in her own quiet way. She brings me groceries now and then. Asks how I'm sleeping. She's even come to church with me once or twice. Not for the sermon, I think, but just to be near me without having to speak. It's not what we had. Not even close. But it's more than we had before. One day, as we sat together, me in the recliner, her on the edge of the sofa, I caught her staring at the journal I keep on the side table. You still write in that? She asked. Every night, I replied. What do you write about? I paused. Looked at her. Thought about the hundreds of pages filled with words she'd never read. Mostly things I don't say out loud. She nodded, eyes dropping to her lap. Do you write about me? All the time, I said softly. She didn't ask what I wrote. Maybe she didn't want to know. Or maybe she already did. Before she left that day, she stood by the door for a moment longer than usual. Her hand lingered on the doorknob. I wish I could go back, she said quietly. To being that little girl who thought you were magic. I didn't say anything right away. I couldn't. Because I had wished the same thing, every single day. I still think about her, I finally whispered. She was the best thing I ever built. She looked at me then, really looked at me. And in her eyes, I saw something flicker. Maybe regret. Maybe sorrow. Maybe love that took too long to find its way back. After she left, I sat back down in the chair by the window. The sun was setting, casting long shadows on the floor. I picked up my journal and wrote. She's trying. And I suppose that counts for something. Sometimes, trying is all we have left. And sometimes, it's enough. The chair creaks a little more these days. My body too. But I've come to cherish the quiet. It doesn't feel like loneliness anymore. It feels like memory. Like the echo of a life that was full, even if it wasn't always seen. And every now and then, when I'm lucky, one of Emily's kids calls me. They ask what it was like back then. What their mom was like as a child. What I did for work. Why I still use a flip phone. They laugh when I tell them stories. They ask for more. And for a few minutes, I feel like I matter again. Not because of what I left behind. But because of what I still carry. Do you believe people change when it's too late? I'd like to hear your thoughts. Sometimes I sit in this old chair, close my eyes, and picture her as a child again. Emily, 5 years old, running barefoot through the backyard, her laughter rising like music into the summer sky. A plastic crown crooked on her head. A peanut butter sandwich in one hand. And always, that trust in her eyes when she looked at me. Daddy can fix anything, she used to say. What she never knew is. I believed her. I believed that if I worked hard enough, loved deep enough, stayed quiet enough, I could build a life so strong that nothing could shake it. Not even time. Not even distance. Not even silence. But life has a way of showing you where the cracks are. She never knew how many nights I stayed up counting dollars, trying to stretch them like rubber bands to cover her school supplies and winter coats. She never knew how I pawned my watch, Mary's wedding gift to me, to help with her college application fees. Or how I used to skip lunch every Friday so I could put $20 into a savings envelope labeled Emily's future. She never knew that every birthday she forgot, I still wrote her a letter and tucked it into my drawer, unsigned, unsent, but filled with love. She never knew that I stayed in that little rental not because I had to, but because I didn't need anything bigger than the memories I carried. And maybe she still doesn't know. Not fully. Not in the way that matters most. But I do. I know what I built. I know what I gave. I know the worth of a father's love that never asks for applause, only presence. People talk about legacy like it's something carved in stone. Buildings, bank accounts, family names etched on plaques. But I think legacy is quieter than that. Legacy is the warmth in a child's coat because her father patched the holes instead of buying himself new shoes. Legacy is the wooden chair that doesn't creak because someone took the time to sand it smooth. Legacy is a quiet man with calloused hands and a soft voice who never stopped showing up, even when no one saw him arrive. Emily might never fully understand what I carried for her. What I still carry. She may remember me as the man who lived small, gave quietly, and asked for little. And maybe, someday, that memory will make her stop and ask her own children about their hearts, their dreams, their fears, before the silence grows too wide. But until then, I'll keep sitting in this chair. Watching the light shift through the window. Writing down the days as they pass. I'm not waiting for an apology. I'm not waiting for change. I've made peace with the space between us. And maybe, just maybe, when she opens that will one day, when she sees what I left behind, not in money, but in meaning, she'll understand. She'll read my notes. She'll see the entries in my journal. She'll hold that wooden box in her hands. And she'll finally know. Not about the savings. But about the sacrifice. Maybe she thought I had nothing left to give. But what she never saw, was how much of me I had already given.